I'm sorry. I'm like,
So it's
we just asked. What do you look like in the morning with this thing?
I'm the only person in my family that has bedhead on their chin.
Okay, great. That's great. You can tell it's getting towards the end of the day, but ladies and gentlemen, this is probably, I'm not going to say it's one of the most important ones. We've done so many important things between the live jumpstart and the additional modules that we've been doing here, but this is also one of the cool things. It's not something you do every day. We're talking about deploying domain controllers, but if you're coming out of Server 2003, one of the biggest things that you run across right away is, I want to make a domain controller, and you type in DCPROMO. It doesn't work anymore. We've got better ways, and we've also got some cool ways. Let me show you what we're going to talk about here. Take a look. We're going to mention a little bit more about DCPROMO. We're going to talk about, we have a new module, of course, with PowerShell. And this is much better of setting up. You can do an entire forest and domain controllers. We also have something that Ashley's going to talk about, DC cloning. And then we're going to take a few moments to talk about one of the hottest, and I don't want to say hottest, the most important technologies in IT since the invention of the computer. I'm not kidding. Desired state configuration. If you know DSC, you're going to see how to make a domain controller with DSC. If you don't know DSC, it's going to be kind of confusing, but it's going to show you how important learning DSC is, and we'll give you some resources for that. So,
wake-up call.
Yeah, it's certainly a wake-up call. Ashley, DCPROMO. I got a green slide that says DCPROMO. What do you want to say about DCPROMO?
I'm going to say this is not your daddy's DCPROMO. It is long gone.
DCPROMO is long gone.
Yeah. Let's take a look here at the screen. I actually copied this from a TechNet article just last week because we need to read, and I'm going to break a rule. As a presenter, you never read to your audience, but I'm going to read this one.
Okay.
And we can keep this on the screen so they can read along with me, okay? Here we go. The DCPROMO EXE remains in Windows Server 2012 for command line unattended installations only and no longer runs the graphical installation wizard. It is highly recommended that you discontinue use of DCPROMO.exe for unattended installs and replace it with the ADDSDeployment Module, as the now deprecated executable will not be included in the next version of Windows.
And what I'd like to point out with as much oomph as possible is, first of all, DCPROMO don't work the way you think it does for a long time. There is no graphical to it. It's been just for unattended installs. Not great. We got a PowerShell replacement that is great. You shouldn't be using anyways, but they gave you the final message.
Right.
This is it. We're done now.
I don't think we can be any clearer than this message we just read.
Yeah, but how many people are still running Server 2003? I mean, it was pretty clear that, you know. But,
and so, now I was just with a customer a few weeks ago. They've got about, in one particular force, maybe 70, 80 DCs they've got to get off of 2003 in the next little bit very quick. So this is one way that they can do that, by automating these processes using the latest and greatest.
And I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Do you want to, is there anything else on DCPROMO, or do you want to talk about the module?
Now let's go on to the module.
Okay,
now
I got a green screen for that module, the ADDSDeployment Module.
Right, and let me explain it this way. So we're in this module, we're going to look at 3 different ways to deploy domain controllers. We're going to look at the deployment module, we're going to look at DC cloning, which is a new feature in 2012, and then we're going to look finally at desired state configuration. That's 3 different techniques. If we actually demoed and waited for DCs to build on my little laptop with 8 VMs running at the same time, we'd be here all day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the code, show you, and it's all documented publicly. I'm not showing you anything that's magic here. I'm going to walk you through the code on doing the deployment module and also on the DC cloning. And then for the finale, we're actually going to do a desired state configuration DSCPROMO. All right, so that's where we're headed.
Did you just say DSCPROMO?
I said DSCPROMO.
I think we need to call the PowerShell team and just kind of point out DCPROMO is gone, but we now got DSCPROMO, baby, for our domain controllers. I think that's a big word. Yep. The reason we're focusing so much on DSC is, as you'll see, it is a major major technology for today. So take it away on
All
the
right,
module,
let's take
sir.
a look. Yes, so in Active Directory here now, when we install for the V2 version, way back from the first slide we looked at in the Jumpstart, we talked about the versions, right? So this was released in, if I take a look at my available modules here, this was released with PowerShell, well, with the Active Directory PowerShell version 2 on Windows Server 2012. Okay, so we've got the AD module, which we've had all along, and then we have a new module, ADDSDeployment. Okay, and this is the engine behind Server Manager. When you go into promote a DC, it uses this. Now, the old DCPROMO, we had to run it on the box.
Right.
None of these do you have to be logged in on the box to do a DCPROMO.
We can do it all over PowerShell remoting.
Yeah, it's all remote. You
Yeah.
don't even have to ever touch the box.
Yep.
And that's the idea.
Because I have domain controllers that I need in different parts of the country, and I can't afford to fly to every single one of those, just touch box. And
Right.
I'm not going to be using RDP. I'm going to be using maybe core boxes or something. So
Right.
this is awesome.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because core is great for domain controllers.
Core is great for just about everything. You should be using core boxes. They're more secured, they're faster. Enough preaching about core, though.
All right, so let's get going here. Here's my module, ADDSDeployment. I'm going to import the module. I don't have to, but I just want to for show here. Get command dash module ADDSDeployment. Now, this is our new module. And you can see here we have add ADDS read-only domain controller account. We've got install. Here we go. Install ADDS. Let's start with forest, domain, or domain controller.
So ADDS Forest is going to make us a whole new, brand new forest.
From scratch.
If we were starting from scratch, most people probably aren't doing that, but you can,
Right.
especially for lab environments. ADDS domain, create us a new domain, and then I'm guessing the domain controller makes us a new domain controller.
Exactly.
Oh, good.
Yep. Then, now the part of the problem and frustration with doing DCPROMO in the past was I had to do the schema update, I had to do the AD prep and all that jazz, right? Now what we've got is we've got these test commandlets. So these tests will test the forest to make sure it's got the latest schema version. It'll test the domain. It'll test the DC installation and uninstallation to make sure you're not going to run through any roadblocks first.
Oh, and I like that. That way you know ahead of time whether you need to do some stuff. Okay, that's
And
great.
it's one button now. It just does it for you in the background, so you don't have to worry about it. So you don't have to go run this XE and then run DC Pro and all that. You just run install, and it'll check
take
the
care of-
dependencies, and it'll fix whatever needs to be fixed and get you going. And then finally, there's an uninstall ADDS domain controller.
Oh yeah, because we got to get rid of some of those
Yeah.
old ones and stuff like that.
So if I do a test ADDS domain controller installation, you can see there are a number of parameters here. Prep credential, allow password replication, all this stuff, critical replication, only deny password replication, all this, no DNS on network, no global catalog, no reboot, all these parameters here to test and see on this box, if I were to promote it, would it all go well the first time?
Yeah.
And this you can run on your own just to test to make sure the environment's ready. But when you run the installed ADDS domain controller, it'll do it for you anyway. So it does that as a safety up front. So let's grab a credential here. Actually, I'm not going to execute the code. I want to keep things moving. So this is a script that I released out of my blog called Touch-Free Domain Controller Deployment with 2012. Something like that is the name. And I've got a whole list of the implementation plan, the validation plan, and the backout plan. So those are all scripted, so you can copy and paste them into your change control process.
And I think, yeah, that's really important for change control. You definitely want all of that information. So the fact that you already have it out there so you can easily put it into your process, right on.
Yeah. So here we go. This is going to be a DC deployment, get AD domain controller. I just run that to say, hey, here's a list of my current DCs. It shows me that in that list, I don't have one called CV member 3 or whatever I'm going to deploy. I'm going to import the server manager module. I don't have to import it, but I just do for good form. Get Windows feature. And I say on the CV member 1, I want to see what features are installed. Well, the reason why I got to do that first is I have to install the feature of AD domain services.
Now, I think this confuses people is that you don't get the module to do the install until you've installed the Windows feature. Some guys get kind of confused. about you've got to have the actual Windows feature ADDS
Right.
before you get the module. Just like if you've been working with Server 2012 or anything else, if you want the commandlets for DNS, well, you got to have DNS. You got to have, if you want the commandlets for IIS, the module for IIS, you have to first install IIS, and that's what you're doing here. Is you're installing the feature, and then we'll get the module.
So when the feature comes in, the next piece of code will be available to work when I call install the domain controller, right? So that installs it remotely, and I include the management tools there. So then I can just do a quick check. Hey, yeah, I can see after it's done installing, it's there. And big thing to notice here, I'm going to do an invoke command against this computer remotely, and this is what Server Manager does. I'm going to call install ADDS domain controller. Let's just look at the big code view here. So all this code right here is going to be passed over. Now, again, I've got a plain text password, not best practice, obviously, but that's there, and you can work around that other ways, but that's the quick and easy way. So here we've got a number of parameters defining just like all the bells and whistles in the GUI. And if you go through the GUI now through Server Manager, it will give you the script at the end. Yeah, all you have to do is copy and paste and edit a few things.
That's one of the things a lot of guys don't realize is that the new Server Manager will give you this that you can now use for automation. So the new Server Manager is not like the old Server Manager. The new one for Server 2012 is awesome.
Yep. So then, once that's done, notice one little thing. I'm using invoke command, and my credential is created, the variable is created on my local machine.
Right.
I have to put $using here because I'm going to teleport that variable into that remote session.
Yeah, and guys, if you're not too sure what that is, it's a PowerShell remoting thing. So take a look at PowerShell remoting in a little bit in depth. This is one way that you can pass variables to the remote machine from your local machine when you're working with it. So, and he's obviously got to send credentials over to the other machine.
Yeah. I'm also going to tell it not to reboot when it's done because I want to manage the restart myself. With the new restart computer commandlet in V3, I can wait for the box to come back up.
I know. I love the new restart computer too. I love it.
I like the little spinner that you get.
Yeah,
that keeps you entertained.
Little spinner, and I use this in scripting all the time. Do this, do this, do this, restart this, but don't do this other stuff until he comes back up, or at least, like you have, for PowerShell to come back up. Then you can go ahead and...
So what this says is reboot the computer and wait until I can actually talk to it over remoting, over PowerShell. I know everything's fully booted and ready to go, and then I can keep my script going.
I love that.
Yes, very nice, very nice.
So really, once you've installed the feature in basically one command, you've made a domain controller.
Yeah, and so then I just do a quick check, hey, get AD domain controller, see that it's there. Then you can do other things like validate the services that have been installed, make sure the sysvol share is there, and do some other steps, which is in the bigger script that's published out on the blog.
Well, so I install the feature for ADDS, I get the module, I can do the commandlet. Commandlet's got all the parameters I need. Okay, that's really easy. Now, I've done that. I've done that quite a bit.
Yeah.
What's this DC cloning thing?
Well, hold on. But with this piece, I've got a script called DCPROMO up for my lab and a DCPROMO down. So what I do is I just run the promo. And I tell you what, if you want to see something cool, I did this from my phone at PowerShell Saturday 05 in Atlanta, and I recorded the session. It's out on my blog. You can watch it.
I remember seeing that. I remember watching that.
You can watch that YouTube video, and it actually shows you from using PowerShell Web Access on my phone. You can watch the DCPROMO script run on the phone.
Now,
it's crazy.
Now, most people aren't going to be deploying domain controllers from their phone, but here's the thing. You can, because of PowerShell Web Access, you have the script on there, you have the commands on there, not just your phone, but whatever tablet you're using. That's the kind of power you have with PowerShell and all of the components of PowerShell. I think that's really cool. I watched that video, and I think everybody that sees it kind of goes, dude, that's cool.
It was crazy, man. And it worked.
Absolutely crazy.
And it worked, yeah.
And it worked.
Okay, so let's move on to the next banner.
So I got a green slide here for DC cloning. What is DC cloning? I'm guessing that we're making clones.
Yes.
Clones.
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 And my last name is not McClone. It's McGlone.
Well, I didn't call you McClone.
I know you didn't, but
now
that's
I'm
for
going
all the
to.
people out there that mispronounce my name. It's not McClone, it's McGlone.
Well, it's
right?
probably going to be McClone now.
Yeah.
See all the chat
I
windows
get
going.
that, yeah. So anyway, cloning, this is a new feature in 2012, and I'm going to refer you to a blog post by one of my esteemed peers. I mentioned him earlier, Tom Moser. There are a number of people that have blogged about it, but Tom's got a great post out on the Ask PFE Plat blog. That's out on TechNet. So go out there and search for the DC cloning. I actually have a link for it here in the notes of the script if you download the scripts later. So what this does is it's all based on a new feature in 2012 called VM Generation ID. So imagine, and we can flip back the camera. So imagine if you could copy a VM of a DC and boot it up and make a new one.
Okay.
That
would be totally cool, but right now, I mean, in the past when you've tried to, if you've copied a DC and just started it up, and you get the same thing, computer name, all this kind of stuff, bad stuff happens.
Right.
Not good.
Right. So we fixed that.
Okay, I like the way, I like the, okay.
Yeah, so now and the product group was really excited about this because for a long time we had this USN rollback problem with snapshots and virtualization and things, so we fixed that in 2012. And that's the 2012 release, not the R2, so it's fixed in 2012. And the way we did it was this technique called VM Generation ID. So there's this extra attribute that we track. And we know on the database we've talked about invocation ID.
Right.
Well, this is another one. It's called VM Generation, or VM Gen ID for short. So here's what happens. You take a snapshot of a DC, and most, within the last 2 years, all the virtualization platforms, Hyper-V, VMware, whoever, they've updated it to mark this so that when the VM external to the operating system, you shut it down, who knows what happened to that VM at that point.
Right.
It boots back up and it sees that it's had this mark placed on it externally. It's this really cool way to communicate with the outside world or the host of the VM environment.
Right.
So now, when I go to check the database and I boot up and I say, wait a minute, the VM Gen ID that I have last stored in the database doesn't match what I'm receiving now. I know somebody out there has done something to my machine. So that triggers this whole chain of events where I have to check and see, okay, is there a clone configuration file on my box? Because that means they wanted me to do this.
Okay.
So now I'm going to look at my clone configuration and I'm going to DCPROMO myself down. And then I'm going to do like this sysprep. It's like they stripped down sysprep just for DCs, and it runs its own sysprep with the unattend file that you've placed on there. And then when it did the DCPROMO down, it left the database there.
So when it comes back up with the correct IDs, all it has to do then is request any changes.
Right. So, and do you remember what you call that when you bring up, you do a backup copy of the database? And you do your DCPROMO with that there?
Are you talking about that snapshot thing? Or
not snapshots, no. This is the, and the only reason I can't recall right now is because I'm in front of thousands of people. But
well, of course, that's
right.
It always
anyway,
happens.
There's this special feature in DCPROMO when you do the NTDS utils involved in there. So you basically do what's it called? This is embarrassing. I do know this type of stuff. I really do this for a living. I really do. All right. Anyway, so this is the way you would deploy DCs like over a WAN. So you make a copy of the database and you ship it over.
Yeah.
And so that way you don't have to replicate all of it.
You probably have all done this at some point where you've made a copy of the database, where you put it on CD or something, and you ship it.
And you're pointing at your screen saying, right, that Microsoft guy should know this.
So
right?
that you don't have to do the entire replication across the WAN. Yeah.
So the beautiful thing here is in place now, I've got to copy the database locally. And when I run DCPROMO, it points to that. Because the thing with DCs in the past is I build the OS, I run DCPROMO, I got to copy all this data back over.
Right.
Well, I've got all of that there. Why don't I just change a couple metadata type things and leave the data there and ta-da, new DC.
Then I can join replication and life is good.
And that's the concept behind cloning.
Replication.
Yes, replicating, yes, right. So now I've got a computer object, and I'll show you here real quick. There's a MSDS generation ID stored on the AD computer object of the domain controller. And notice here, oh, isn't that interesting? Only one of them has it? Well, that's because it's stored locally on each DC and you can't query it. You have to go to each DC to get that. So let's take a look then. I've got to actually query this and do some really quick shenanigans in my query to now go get the VM gen ID. There's the invocation ID of each DC.
Oh, okay.
So these are all VMs in my lab here. They all have a VM gen ID. And the way I had to do that was I actually had to go query from that DC to get that property because it's only stored locally on that DC. It is a byte data type attribute. Who cares? All right. So now what I've done is I've got a clone path. So what I had to do was, now this is a those of you who download this script, don't run it. All right, this is a proof of concept script.
Right.
It's not intended for production use. All right. So this is just to give you some ideas. Basically, this is all the kung fu that has to go in and find. I've kind of done some prompting to say, give us an out grid view where I can pick which DC do you want to clone, and then go find the VM for that DC and start this whole thing where I create a copy of that VM. So I'm trying to do a little bit of host manipulation,
a little automation on
with the
this part,
VMs and automate that as well as the cloning procedure.
I like it.
So, and this is not smooth by any stretch. It's just a rough thing that I did in my lab one day. So then I'm going to invoke a command over this DC, and I've got to add it to a group called clonable domain controllers. It's a security measure. You can't just go clone any DC.
Right.
Somebody with elevated permissions has to take that computer object and add it to the group clonable domain controllers.
Which is a great security option because
Exactly.
you don't want just anybody taking a copy of this.
Exactly. So then we add it to that group. Now I'm remoting to my DC. I'm invoking a command on there, and you have to do this thing called DC clone excluded applications list. So here's one of the challenges. When you've got a domain controller that's running a configman client on it, an AV client on it, those applications usually have some kind of a unique database signature that identifies it to the central server, and those things don't clone very well.
Yeah.
So we've got kind of a running list that it can query and say, okay, here are the known apps that are friendly to this, and here are the ones that aren't. So what this does is it warns you in advance, these are the problems you're going to have. You need to uninstall these things before you try to do a clone. And then we go out, we look at the database path, we find the database directory in the registry, and then that's where we make sure that we remove any old config files and we put in a new one, a DC clone config file. So we drop that clone config file in the database path. So when the DC boots up, I've got a new gen ID. Hey, wait, look, there's a clone config file. I'm just going to copy myself.
Got it.
And then I shut down the target DC. So that preps the DC, okay, that's going to be cloned. So that DC goes down and comes back up. His VM gen ID matches. So he doesn't suspect anything, and he never goes to look at the config file. But the other one comes up. His gen ID is different.
It's different, and now he's
Something's up.
Okay.
I've got a clone config file. I'm going to clone myself. And that's just one branch of the logic with this VM gen ID feature. And there's a lot of other things in here about virtualization protection that are built in.
Well, and I think what the key aspect is this may not be a way that you are building different domain controllers, but it's one option, especially in a virtualized environment. What I really like is what you just said. Virtualization has had some challenges because of it didn't have some of the protection mechanisms. Just copying a domain controller used to be, please don't do that. That's not going to work well. Now we have mechanisms that can recognize that, and we can use those then for things like this DC cloning.
So what happens if I come up, my gen ID is changed, and there's no config file there for my cloning?
Oh.
So uh-oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, that would be...
Somebody has like done something to my memory as a DC. So now, instead of proceeding as a normal DC, they call it deploy the safeties. So it dumps the RID pool, so it doesn't try to reassign any RIDs,
won't generate any RIDs, yeah.
It essentially does a non-authoritative restore on itself. It resets its invocation ID on the database, and then it tells all of its peers, it says, hey, I know we just talked a few minutes ago, but I'm missing time now. Please replicate back to me all those things that I sent you earlier so I can get caught up. And then he comes back and he gracefully recovers from that old USN rollback scenario.
I think that's a great... You deploy the safeties, first of all, but I think that's great. Going into a non-authoritative state so that he can get caught up, that kind of thing. Awesome.
So
totally
that's
awesome.
A new feature then built in to 2012.
I like
and
that.
just kind of cruising through, I've got the rest of this, automating, shutting down the VM, exporting the VM, making a cloned copy. So obviously on my little laptop lab, it's going to take a while to take a whole VM, multi-gig copy and all that stuff. So,
but everybody can get started with this in their own lab environment.
Right. So you can go use this. Here's some error documentation in case you need to look up some troubleshooting around it. Then when it comes back up here, I can go find the box and do a session to reset a static IP and that kind of thing on the box once it comes back up. And also notice the machine name is automatically appended with CL0001,
For a clone.
2,
Okay.
3, 4. And just so that you know it works, out here, if I do, you've kind of noticed it all along perhaps, but here it is.
Yeah, you have one that you...
I have a cloned DC right there in the lab. So I know it's like one of those 1950s movies where
I know that's
pointing at the monster, but you never see it, right?
Monster, yeah.
All right, so we've talked about it. We didn't actually do it because we wanted to conserve our time for this last segment.
And this last thing is really, really important. And so here's the thing. There's a technology called desired state configurations. Comes with PowerShell v4. It's built into the operating system. This is a very, very important addition that will affect all platforms. And it is designed to work whether you are joined to Active Directory or not. In a nutshell, let me give you what the idea is. Now, we can't go through DSC in here. Matter of fact, it would take entirely new jump starts and all of that for DSC. This is enormous. If you're from a Unix environment, you've worked with Puppet or Chef, DSC is Microsoft's version of that. DSC allows us to declaratively decide, in other words, this is what I want a server to look like. I don't have to know how to make the server look that way. DSC has what's called resources that knows how to make the server that way. I do the simple part. I just say, I want you to look like this, and it will become like that. Here's the other thing with DSC. Not only does it make it really easy for me to decide what I want my boxes to look like, those boxes are going to look that way, period. In other words, a junior admin that comes up and tries to change it, no, not so much. So desired state configuration also allows us to manage one of the most important aspects in IT, which is drift. Think about this. When something goes wrong on your network, what's the first question you ask? What's changed? Well, now we're getting to the point where we can remove that question. Think of the impact that that's going to have. So DSC is a huge thing, and it is also somewhat of an advanced level in PowerShell if you're doing this through PowerShell. A lot of products are now engaging and utilizing DSC as part of their infrastructure in the way that they're doing configurations. So if DSC, this is something you need to start to get into. And I just want to point out, we've got a lot of DSC resources at PowerShell.org, and I'm pretty sure if you were to ask for it, you're probably going to get some more DSC resources right from Microsoft Virtual Academy as well to help you get started and dive into DSC. What our goal is, for those of you that know what DSC is, yep, you can make domain controllers with it, and Ashley's going to show us how. If you're not familiar with DSC, this may look a little bit bizarre, but see if you can hang with the concept on this, because with just a few simple settings, I'm going to be able to go like this and make domain controllers at the snap of a finger, anywhere, anytime I want them, and they're going to stay domain controllers. So, Did I do okay with that, Ashley?
Nice setup, man.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice setup.
I was worried I was going to screw that up.
You were kind of preaching there for a minute. You were on a roll.
I was preaching because got to know this, but I'll try to,
Yeah, all right. So here we go. Now, the beautiful thing about this is you can actually deploy 10 domain controllers at once if you wanted. And he's talking about this is set it and forget it thing because you can actually put it into watchdog mode, so to speak. And so if anybody changes it, it puts it back the way it was.
Yeah.
So we've got a stripped down version of a DCPROMO configuration for DSC here. There's obviously a lot of other things you would do in a server build, setting up the networking and the naming and all that stuff. We kind of skipped that just to focus on the domain controller promotion piece because we want to see you use this. And this comes out of something called the DSC Resource Kit that the Powershell team has published out on the TechNet Script Center. You can go download it, and there are links to that in the scripts that we're going to look at. So let's take a look at the demos here. So first things first, I have to install the DSC Resource Kit. And here what you'll see is when I put that under Windows PowerShell modules under program files, there's an X Active Directory resource kit here piece that's installed from the PowerShell team. So I didn't write the resource for DSC. This is just using what they put out there on the Script Center. So now the first step is just because of the technique that we're using, we're doing a push deployment in this case. You could also do a pull deployment. It's much more robust and better, but for the simplicity of the demo, we've already copied this module file to the target machine.
Oh, and basically what he's pointing out is that a pull deployment for DSC is the recommended way to do this. We're doing a push, which is great for testing. It's great for what we're doing in here to do it. But every machine has to have the resources that you're utilizing. If we were doing a pull deployment, these would automatically get copied to the machines, but Ashley had to manually copy them because we were doing a push deployment.
Yeah, so that's just one little caveat. Don't get hung up on that piece. So here's the link from the TechNet script gallery to go get that, and it explains how to use it. So the examples that they have out there, though, do not include just a simple domain controller promotion. So what I did was I took the examples that they had provided and I stripped it down to just doing a single DCPROMO, which now we're calling a DSC.
We're calling it DSC promo.
Right.
You hear that, guys? We want to officially call it DSC promo. So contact legal or something.
Right here. Yep. Here we go. Configuration DSC promo. There it is. Yep. So we got to pass in a couple parameters. Think about this as like a PowerShell function. You've got a function
it's a lot like
with some parameters.
Function.
All right. So I've got a parameter for the safe mode administrator password there and the domain password. These are things that if I run DCPROMO, I'm going to have to know those things. I've got to have a credential.
It would always ask you.
Right. It's going to ask you for those anyway. Now we're going to import the resource here. This is like importing a module, essentially, for these Active Directory configurations in desired state configuration. Now, a node says, node, it sounds like trying to say nose when you're stopped up.
Node. I got to stop up.
My node stopped up, yeah.
I think it's very interesting. I get a question all the time is why didn't they call this computer name? Because this is where you put in the name of the boxes or whatever you want to get to. And the reason is that one of the cool things about DSC is this works for things other than Windows computers. That's why it's called Node. I want you to think about it. Wouldn't it be cool if you could manage Linux boxes or switches with this? And you can. That's why this is so cool, and that's why it's so an important thing. But the name Node, I got a code in my Node, throws people off that it should be computer name. Yeah. No, it shouldn't be, because that would be like a Microsoft Net BIOS name. What if it's something else entirely?
Yep. So we're configuring an endpoint, a node here, which happens to be it's coming from a parameter that's being passed in called all nodes. We'll get to in just a second. So that's going to come in with the node name. So now, first off, we've got to install the feature. Remember we did this earlier when we did the scripted?
Yeah, we had to actually type code, though, to do this. We had to type install Windows feature, ADDS, and all this. What you're doing here is you're just declaring, I just want this feature.
Just make sure this feature is present. That's
God,
it.
I love that. Ensure that it's present.
It's that. So I'm not really writing PowerShell code here. I'm just saying install this feature. And this Windows feature little string name here, I could call it XYZ if I wanted. It doesn't really matter. So over here, the main thing is that the feature name says AD Domain Services, which is really what we did in the first domain controller deployment example. We installed the feature remotely, and then we ran the install AD domain controller, which is what this is going to do. But the code is off in this separate module, so I don't have to really write the code again.
You don't have to know or write all the code and all the commandlets and all that kind of stuff. I love this.
So where we're headed with DSC is really exciting because now we've had several years of PowerShell, and we've all taken it, we've scripted server builds, and now we don't even have to write the script to do the server build anymore.
And one of the things that I like to point out to IT guys is a lot of the things that you do in your job, yes, we know how to automate, and we've already automated, and so is Microsoft. Those imperative things, those step-by-step tasks that you go through and do, you should be automating them, because that's what a DSC resource is. It's that stuff automated so that a guy like me that doesn't know how to build a domain controller can just say, make me one. And that imperative code is already being done for us. This is so off the charts cool.
You write it once and then you just keep
write it once and you just keep throwing it out.
So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to ensure that this feature is present. Next is we're going to call the resource XAD domain controller. And what that is code behind the scenes. It says go look in the AD module, find the AD domain controller code, and pass in these parameters automatically. We don't care what else happens, just go do it. So we're going to pass in what's the domain that it's going to join. Now in this case, I have a member server that's already a member of the domain. So this is the domain name. We've got the credential we captured earlier for the domain admin credential. Safe mode administrator password. We're actually going to capture a PowerShell credential, but just use the password piece of it. Doesn't matter what the username is in this case.
Right.
Now, notice this. Depends on the feature being installed. So DSC builds in this automatic trickle-down kind of behavior so it knows what has to happen first based on this depends on framework.
I love that.
So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this code just to create the function in memory. It doesn't really do anything as far as output is concerned. All right, so that just puts that code in memory just like a function would. Next, I'm going to define the configuration data. And in this case, I'm just going to configure, okay, this is CV member 3, Coho Vineyard, member server number 3, in the cohovineyard.com domain. And this retry count stuff is just basically how many times am I going to retry to make sure the domain's present. It's just a quick thing, not really related to what we're doing. And then DSC allow plain text password is a caveat for this. Again, yes, we're using plain text passwords in a demo. We know there are better ways to do this down the road that we've already thought about it, but this is just a quick way for a demo. So I'm going to create that configuration data. Notice this is just a PowerShell hash table. All right. Now, here comes the magic. Almost. I'm going to call that function called DCPROMO. It's a configuration. That's what we call it in DSC. Going to give it this config data that we just created. I'm going to capture a credential, get credential, for the new safe mode password. I'm going to capture a credential for the admin account. And so when I run this, it's going to crank out a text file.
Yeah, this isn't actually making a domain controller at this point.
It's creating a text file that gets pushed to the server. When it goes to configure itself, it looks at the text file and says, oh, I need to make myself a domain controller.
And as Ashley runs this, you can notice the note that Ashley has below. This text file is called a MOF, which is a Management Object Framework file. This file is something that's universal and generic that all systems understand how to read. That's why, what this PowerShell code is doing is generating this MOF file. It's the MOF file that will be sent to the remote system that will be used to build the configuration on that box. And it's generic across multiple platforms.
Yeah. And this sounds like a lot more work.
It does,
at
but
first.
At first it does. But
once you get your mind wrapped around DSC, you're going to think, why didn't I do this earlier?
This is going to be, absolutely.
So now we've got the prompt up here, new domain, new DC safe mode admin credential. So I typed in the admin credential. And now I'm prompting for domain admin credentials that will let me run DCPROMO. I want to make sure DSCPROMO, yes. Make sure I type my password correctly, slowly and carefully, and it doesn't do anything. Oh, but wait, there's a text file.
There it is. There's that text file.
It created a MOF text file, and I'm not going to put this on the screen because it has passwords in it. All right. So we could look at this text file and it just says, here's your configuration. Now, here is the magic line.
This is the magic line.
This is where you want to get real close to your screen and watch what's about to happen. This is an historic moment. This is one of those times when you can say you saw it here first.
Absolutely, and I just want to point out, this is going to be where that hard work that we just did wasn't that hard, and we only have to do it once. At this point, whenever we want, we can just take this moth and we can do this magical line of start DSC configuration.
Here we go. We're going to start DSC configuration, tell it the computer name to target, and the path is this path that includes the CV member 3 moth file. Now you're about to see a bunch of blue text. And if you've watched any DSC demos, this is where the magic happens. Here we go.
Boom, 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 boom.
And we get the progress bar.
It's collecting the data. It does a get target resource, or excuse me, a test target resource. Then the resource has this set target resource. In other words, it's actually doing what we desired at this point.
So the first off, it does the test. It says, is the AD domain services feature installed? No, it's not. It ends the test, and then it starts a set to set that feature as being installed. Okay. Now, everybody always says, what's the orange text? Well, that's the whole thing about when you install a feature and it warns you, hey, make sure Windows updates are turned on.
Right.
That's all. That's not really a problem. Okay. Next, that was the dependency. Now we're doing the domain controller promotion, and this is actually using the deployment module we referenced earlier, but it's in behind-the-scenes code I don't even have to write now.
Code I don't have to write. And
I'm getting all this output. Again, if you've ever done this in the GUI, you've seen the same prompts. The DNS delegation thing, the 2012, Windows NT4 cryptography warning. This is all stuff, the DNS delegation. It's all familiar little warning prompts that you would get in the GUI anyway. Now we see, oh look, it's installing Group Policy Management Console. Thank you.
Yeah, it's making it a domain controller.
Yeah, it sure is. So up here we see what it's doing is that first it resolved the domain. I can find the domain before I start the DCPROMO. All right, it says domain is present. No domain controller could be contacted. In other words, the local box is not a DC.
It's not a DC, yeah.
Then I'm checking for the domain is present. Yes, verify the present. So now I'm going to create the domain controller.
Oh, look, it's doing the schema stuff now.
Yeah,
it's actually doing the replication now.
The progress bar is built in, really nice feature, and you can see as it's stepping through each piece of building the DC.
Yeah, the individual steps that we didn't have to code, it's now doing. In the future, when we want to fire off to another domain controller, start DSC configuration, boom, there we go. Boom, there we go. Boom, there we go.
Yep.
It's amazing.
Replicating, configuring.
As this thing finishes, we could, and Ashley was pointing this out, if somebody walks up and says, I don't want this to be a domain controller, well, when it comes back up, it's still going to be a domain controller. I love doing that. Hey, do me a favor, go on and install this thing over there. And the junior admin will go over there and, I can't get rid of it, I can't get rid of it. Yes, you failed.
It keeps coming back. Yes.
It keeps coming back. It looks to me like, I think it might be like done, bro.
Node is now a domain controller for cohovineyard.com, indicating to the local configuration manager that we need a reboot. Okay. And that took us 118 seconds for a DC promo. Wait, but 150 down there at the very bottom.
We have a domain controller.
In less than 3 minutes.
Domain controllers, domain controllers, domain controllers, domain controllers.
Now, this is a lab with like a handful of user accounts. So if you've got a 30 gig DIT, right, it's going to take a while to replicate everything in. But, right, this is an unattended process, essentially. Now, what we didn't show you here is that if I would have put in that configuration block, just that little bit of data, another computer name, another computer name, another computer, I could have put 5, 10, 15, 20 server names in there, cranked out all the moth files, and then go send them off to them. They would all be promoting at once.
We can add a computer name parameter to it. There's a lot of flexibility with DSC. Definitely a technology you got to go to because this is what we're doing.
We're not quite done, though. I'm going to restart the computer now.
Oh, okay.
And this is the fun part. We get to watch the little spinner. There it is, look.
Oh, yeah, we wanted to show everybody the little spinner.
Restarting computer. I love this. It gives us the play-by-play. We're waiting for the restart to begin. and then it goes down, and it's just waiting for it to come back up. So we want to give it a minute to reboot now to finally finish. And again, we can put all of this in the resource or the configuration, but we just wanted to keep it a simple demo for today, just to say that, okay, we've seen a DCPROMO now with DSC.
A DSC promo.
A DSC promo.
A DSC promo.
That's right.
We're going to get that word.
Saw it here first.
You saw it here first.
Yeah.
Hey, while that guy's restarting, do you want to kind of review some of the links in the books that we started everybody out with?
Sure.
Oh, here, take a look at the slide and
All
remind
right.
them about your links to your blogs and where they can get all of this stuff.
All right. So the first link is MVA PowerShell AD. That's PSAD. So that link will take you to my blog where you can get all the scripts that I've demonstrated today to use in your own environment, in your test lab environment.
And yeah, in your test lab.
In your test lab environment where you then prove these things out and modify for your own use. All right. And then we've got an MVA Premier link. So I'm a Premier field engineer for Microsoft. I spend my time going to help customers with Active Directory. That's what I do for a living. If you would like me or one of my peers to come help you with your Active Directory or your PowerShell, we'd be glad to do that. You have to be a Premier customer for me to come see you. So if you're already a Premier customer, you can talk to your account manager and just tell them to go find GoTPFE and we'll get hooked up and I'll come see you. The other thing is if you're not a Premier customer, you go to the MVA Premier link here, and there's a little page that tells you a little bit about Premier services, and you have to click the contact link and you put in your contact information and you can find out more information about how to get those services. We also have some great books we recommend from some of our colleagues in the field. So,
hey, Richard. Oi.
So Jeffrey Hicks, he's a PowerShell MVP. He specializes in Active Directory PowerShell as well as a number of other things. He's got
Laura
a great
Hunter
book.
and Ken and
Laura are both Microsofties.
Yep, they're
and they
Microsofties.
wrote this book a few years ago. Highly recommend that as well. And you can actually catch them at some conferences sometimes. Well, all these people you can catch at conferences. And then finally, the most recent book was by Richard, who's an MVP out of the UK.
In fact, if you come to the PowerShell Summit 2015 North America, you'll see Jeff Hicks and Richard Sitaways and GoTPFE.
And
well, yeah, I'll be there too, but you want to see him, so you want to come to that summit. Now, did your machine reboot?
Yeah, let's take a look. Yep, so over here then, my machine has rebooted, and we want to make sure this is a real domain controller. So I've not logged into the box, I've not touched it. I'm doing this with remoting now, invoke command, get AD domain controller, and I'm going to bring back a list of DCs. Drum roll. All right, here we go. So we're invoking it. Oh! That's hilarious, man. Now, I have to tell you, in my practicing for this demo, I saw this.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of wait time for it to finish coming up.
Yeah,
so it's still churning. And once it comes up, you'll see it.
Yeah, and you guys know that when you're working with domain controllers, it can come up. Now, I'm going to give him one more shot at that in a second because I want to do a quick review, and then we're going to close out of this. For a review, if you take a look, we looked at stale object cleanup. Remember, you clean stuff up, and we gave you a lot of great techniques and ways to do that in ways that you can start to clean up your objects. Also, managing and troubleshooting replication. You can now work with your sites and your subnets, all of that. One of my favorite sections is recovery. Make sure you enable that recycle bin, and you can recover objects. And also, Ashley's put together that really cool, set of functions for you to be able to do attribute recovery with that almost magical database that loads up in memory, so you could snapshot it and then and then do recovery if you had data corruption, which that's awesome. Also, we talked about deploying domain controllers. The old way is gone, which is good. We got a PowerShell way using PowerShell commandlets to do it. But we also have our favorite DSC. And before we exit out, do you want to try one more time?
Take a look.
Because I want to show them. Go ahead and show them.
There. Yep.
Hey! Woohoo!
There it is.
I love it. when a plan ends on success. And by the way, brother, thank you very much for
You're
this.
welcome, man.
It was great to have you here and
fun.
getting tapped into the knowledge and the wealth that you have for Active Directory. Everybody, I hope you've had a chance to really enjoy the different aspects of drilling into Active Directory. Please extend your Active Directory knowledge and take good care of Active Directory. It needs some love and management too. Thank you for joining us on behalf of Microsoft, myself, and Ashley. Have a great day.